When you look at settings steeped in darkness, dampness, and endless tunnels not carved from the earth, but built by human hands, have you ever wondered where the creators of games, anime, and films drew their inspiration for this gloom, claustrophobia, and sense of hopelessness? Someone might say, that's a silly question. Obviously, it's all made up. For example, the person who invented zombies couldn't have seen them in real life. Yet they came up with the concept. To that, I'd respond, sure. The creators of works like Stray, Dorohedoro, or even Howl's Moving Castle invented their worlds, and those places never truly existed. But the concept wasn't just pulled out of thin air. Its origin lies in a city that set the record for the highest population density per square kilometer, a place where people were born, lived, and died, where the law was dictated by the mafia, yet ordinary people thrived alongside them. This video is dedicated to a city that, for better or worse, no longer exists. In the distant year 960, a military outpost was established to regulate trade in what is now Hong Kong. It's worth noting that while we think of Hong Kong as a sprawling peninsula today, back then, it referred to a small island at the heart of the modern territory. In 1842, the island, along with the outpost, was ceded to Britain by Emperor Dao Guang under the Treaty of Nanking, signed after the First Opium War. The war stemmed from China's isolationist trade policies. The Chinese sold porcelain and silk, considered luxury goods in Europe, but Britain struggled to balance the trade since China had little interest in buying British goods. In their search for a product the Chinese would want, Britain found one: opium. This was despite the fact that selling and smoking opium was strictly forbidden in China. Defiant of Chinese laws, Britain illegally shipped massive quantities of the substance, up to 30,000 chests annually, roughly 2,310 tons. But this couldn't go on forever. British officials waited for the right moment to wage war and pry open China's closed market. That moment came when Commissioner Lin Zexu demanded that the British and Americans surrender all their opium. China had its own leverage, forcing Britain to comply, and the opium was destroyed. While this played a role, the real trigger for the war was lobbying by opium traders, which pushed the British government to declare war on China. After 3 years, China was defeated, and under the signed treaty, Britain gained control of Hong Kong Island and the right to trade. In 1898, China and Britain signed a convention to expand Hong Kong's territory, leasing new lands to Britain for 99 years. Kowloon, however, wasn't included in this agreement despite being part of Hong Kong's territory. This made Kowloon a Chinese enclave, a territory of one state entirely surrounded by another. If I told you Kowloon was the most densely populated city in the world per square kilometer, you might imagine it sprawled over a vast area. But no, it measured just 213 meters long and 126 meters wide, roughly the size of 4 football fields. You could walk its entire perimeter in about 13 to 15 minutes at a leisurely pace. Its height was capped at 42 meters due to the nearby airport, where planes flew just 120 meters above the city during landing, often sweeping debris off rooftops. It might sound absurd that a flight path was routed over such an unstable place, but the explanation is simple. Hong Kong was rapidly developing, and towering buildings left no other landing options. Kowloon, still relatively low-rise at the time, was the only viable path. Among pilots, there was a saying that being assigned a flight over Kowloon meant you'd reach the pinnacle of skill, because pilots had to fly dangerously close to apartment buildings, bank the plane at a 45-degree angle, and pass over Kowloon at minimal altitude. Without the restriction of low-flying planes, residents might have kept building upward until the lower floors collapsed under the weight. Instead, they found a workaround. Rather than building taller, they subdivided rooms and apartments into smaller living spaces. Living like sardines in a can, the population of this tiny patch of land peaked at 50,000 in the early 1990s. Over decades of unchecked construction, around 425 buildings were erected. Officially 350, unofficially up to 500. I've settled on an average for this. Imagine walking through dark, endless, damp corridors. Narrow passageways are lit by dim light spilling from smoke-filled rooms, inhabited by addicts and prostitutes. Tons of wires and pipes dangle from the ceiling, dripping water. The air reeks of garbage and dampness. That was life in Kowloon, but the city wasn't just home to gangs and addicts. Ordinary people lived there too. You might wonder, who in their right mind would choose to move to a sunless place crawling with criminals? There are answers. The biggest draw was no taxes, minimal government interference, and dirt-cheap rent, about $4.50 a month on average. This fueled constant population growth. People opened shops and set up factories. Numerous medical and dental clinics sprang up. To give you a sense of scale, Kowloon housed over 550 small-scale manufacturers, producing everything from furs to golf balls to noodle. So much noodle production that restaurants outside the city bought from Kowloon's producers. Around 150 shops operated, some serving delicacies like rat or dog meat. Space was so scarce that people lived and worked in the same rooms, divided by makeshift partitions. There were 78 dental clinics and 63 medical offices. Outsiders even visited Kowloon for affordable and sometimes higher quality medical care. This was because the community was tight-knit. Everyone knew each other. Doors were often just mesh screens due to poor ventilation. If someone did shoddy work, the community, including the Triads, the local mafia, would hold them accountable, often with harsh vigilante justice. Living conditions were grim. The entire city had only 7 to 15 wells, and the water was barely potable. Early on, when there were just 3 wells, the Triads controlled them and sold water to residents. Electricity, however, was less of an issue. If your outlet broke, you'd simply plug into your neighbors. In Kowloon, people helped each other. Survival in such conditions demanded it. Yet, amid the relentless hustle, there were moments of quiet. When children in local kindergartens napped, everyone paused or worked as silently as possible. Though the city wasn't planned, residents did everything to make life bearable. At its heart were clubs with dancers and lounges. Club owners, knowing their clientele, often funneled visitors through rooms with arcade machines or couches, spaces where men and women could use opium and recover in the dark alongside others. Then there was the rooftop. For those without windows or neighbors with outward-facing views, the rooftop was a lifeline, the only place to breathe relatively fresh air. Kids played there. Adults socialized, and people escaped the noisy, dark tunnels below. In 1987, the government openly discussed demolition, allocating 2.7 billion Hong Kong dollars, about 350 million US dollars, for resident compensation. Even this wasn't enough for everyone, sparking protests. But the wheels of bureaucracy were already turning. In 1992, those refusing to leave were forcibly evicted. Demolition took less than a year. Today, a large park stands where Kowloon once was, with the former administrative Yamen building preserved at its center, the only structure never built over. Locals described life in Kowloon as a harmonious form of anarchy. You might think it was a cesspool of violence and crime, but that's not entirely true. Government raids kept the worst gang activities in check, and crime rates were only slightly higher than in the rest of Hong Kong. Still, issues like child trafficking, child prostitution, and drug trade persisted. So, what's this got to do with Cyberpunk? Kowloon inspired countless works. Take Cyberpunk 2077. Its aesthetic echoes Kowloon's essence. The city was cyberpunk incarnate. Thousands of neon signs, advanced technology for its time, and abysmal living conditions. Playing Stray, I see those dark, wet alleys with dangling wires and pipes. Watching Ghost in the Shell, I spot the endless signs and that iconic plane coming in for a landing. Japanese cyberpunk films from the 80s drew heavily from Kowloon. In the manga Crying Freeman, the protagonist's wife visits the walled city to master swordsmanship and wield a cursed blade. Blood Plus, Kowloon Nights uses the city as a backdrop for a series of murders. In episodes 3 and 4 of Street Fighter II Vi, Kowloon is depicted as a grim, lawless district where Ryu, Ken, and Chun-Li fight for survival. The anime Kowloon generic romance explores romantic adventures in the city. Beyond anime and games, Crime Story starring Jackie Chan features real Kowloon footage. Explosions filmed in the abandoned city, blowing up actual apartments where people once lived. The documentary Baraka also includes detailed shots of Kowloon before its demolition. Kowloon was a place that fused the seemingly incompatible, a true paradox.